metabolic dysfunction. Okay, the reason I really like this topic is because I'm getting into fertility, and I know that there's a huge link to metabolic dysfunction because some of the fertility clinics, they'll actually put their patients on keto or carnivore and they get pregnant. So that tells you something's going on there metabolically. So I want
Yeah.
to know about metabolic dysfunction and oxalates, about mitochondrial dysfunction and detoxification because they're related and how that's affected. And then let's go also then talk about inflammation too, because obviously that's going to lead to metabolic dysfunction as well. And blood sugar, right? Blood sugar dysregulation is also linked to, oxalate toxicity as well. That's huge in fertility, huge with fertility treatments, because a lot of times they'll put the patients on, a blood sugar medication and then they get pregnant. So
Yeah. And this is one of those places where I think it's more than one factor contributing to exacerbating a particular aspect. So, because oxalate's making the mitochondria inefficient, it's affecting their function. And because you're getting inflammation set up, because the oxalate that's in a cell can trigger the inflammasome, if you add any other kind of stressor or inflammation or impact to metabolism, you really have, kind of a three-ring circus going on, a perfect storm of things. So we know for sure that oxalate's doing some additional disruption there because kidney stone risk goes up as your metabolic health goes down. So the more dysregulated your blood sugar, the higher your insulin levels, the more likely you have kidney stones too. So there's that piece of it. I do believe that when you get into people who have metabolic dysfunction of that sort, like either metabolic syndrome or prediabetes or whatever, that you also start to see them producing a bit more oxalate endogenously. So that's that whole B6 nutrients, that aspect of it too. And, the challenge is really that oxalate can do so many things. Like, I don't think we've actually talked about kind of the three big ways that it hits us, but biggest by far is going to be depleting your minerals. So because it's a mineral chelator, almost everybody who's got an oxalate issue is going to be low in magnesium, calcium, iron, zinc, or some combination of, key minerals that are needed in the system. Because when oxalate comes along, it's got a double negative charge. It meets its double positive favorite dance partner. They're going to bind together. And the problem with that is that if that's happening inside the bloodstream, you're no longer going to get the use of that mineral anymore. We don't know. The human body doesn't have the metabolic pathways, is how I should say it, to cleave oxalate away from a mineral. So when the kidneys get rid of the oxalate, they get rid of the mineral that it came with. So that's a real problem. And that affects metabolic function as well. If you don't have enough magnesium, calcium, cofactors to actually perform the kinds of metabolic pathways that you're trying to, then you're not getting the benefit there. We also have this whole issue of driving inflammation right from inside the cell. So when inflammation is implied or implicated in so many areas of health, if you're driving that inflammation from right inside the cell, if oxalate's turning on the inflammasome, that's working against you as well. And then places where oxalate can be in fluids where it can precipitate out, you can end up with physical damage. And they have found oxalate in all kinds of places in the human body. But from a fertility standpoint, I would be concerned, especially with women, for breasts, because microcalcifications in breasts are often calcium oxalate. And anytime you have epithelial cells secretion and the ability to hold something, you could have oxalate precipitating out and causing irritation. And that could even include in the vesicles and the testes. So there's so many places here where it could apply. I'm definitely looking into where these cell transporters that tend to move oxalate, which are the SLC26 family of cell transporters, where they are located. And from the standpoint of, interstitial cystitis clients that you've worked with, like those cell transporters are expressed on the inside of the bladder lining. But I suspect that once we look a little deeper, we may find those same cell transporters are inside the lining of the uterus. And then we've got multiple ways that oxalate oxalate can
I think we
disrupt.
found our paper topic.
We might just
I think
have.
that's it right there. SLC 26. Yeah, and it's
A whole
impacting.
family of cell transporters throughout the entire body. So the problem with oxalate is that we really haven't looked at where it could be going. But if we start following the trail of where those cell transporters are, we may find all kinds of things.
Well, one of my patients was getting ready to do an IVF. So speaking of IVF, a lot of people think IVF is the solution. And like I said, I've been on these Facebook groups and people are not having success with their transfers. And these are with healthy embryos, like embryos that are euploid and graded properly, and they're just not implanting or they're miscarrying. So that's interesting about the oxalates because I bet you they're probably being told to follow some type of vegan or high oxalate diet to get healthier. And in fact, it might be hurting and that's so much money that they're throwing away. I mean, you're looking at a minimum of $20,000 per IVF cycle. But what's interesting that you mentioned, because one of my patients, she was getting ready to do an IVF transfer. She had IC and infertility. She was trying to have her third baby. She was 43, and she's actually on my website right now as one of my testimonial videos. She had multiple miscarriages. We put her on the IC diet. My IC diet is low oxalate, low histamine, and she took some supplements, found out she had an infection as well, and that we were working towards. And then as she was waiting for the cycle to begin, she conceived naturally. She had her baby. Her baby is 6 months old now. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Well, and see, here's what I'd say. We don't know very much in the human world. So there's not as much research in the human world, but in the veterinary world, they know that if you put, say, sheep, goats, cattle on high oxalate forage, and these are ruminant animals with the forage chambered stomachs who are supposed to be able to convert just about anything, but your miscarriage rates will go up. And I don't think it is just the, if you will, then the zygote that is a problem? What if it can't implant because there's a problem with the lining? Or what if the baby's developing naturally, but the mother is eating a high oxalate diet and oxalate gets through the placenta? We do not have a barrier in the placenta to keep oxalate out of the baby. So we don't know whether or not we've had a fetal death. So there's research in the veterinary world looking at this because, you've got a controlled environment, you've got a test subject who can't complain. But with humans, we don't know, but I'd be very suspicious. What if mom's eating a superfood diet and that's why she's having problems? Because baby's getting, essentially inundated with oxalate while it's being gestated.
So let's go upstream then from that. How about PCOS and endometriosis? Are they related?
I have not been able to find exactly the same kind of smoking gun with those two, but because PCOS is also related to metabolic syndrome and those kinds of things, I suspect oxalate's working as a disruptive factor there, as opposed to, really some miscarriages could be a primary oxalate event as opposed to a secondary, if you will. And there's been not any real endometriosis from the standpoint of oxalate, at least not that I could find. But again, when I went looking at the uterine wall and the existence of SLC 26 cell transporters, they are there. So could oxalate be expressed and could it be moved into, the uterine environment and the uterine lining? I think yes. So I think the hypothesis should be that this is a possibility as opposed to just assuming that something that's essentially a toxin and in our food is going to be benign just because it doesn't kill us. I mean, I think that would be naive based on what I'm reading so far.
So it sounds like from fertility perspective, there's multiple layers. So if you go upstream, it could affect, how your body produces energy. It can affect hormones, but then it can also affect the formation of the embryo and mitochondrial dysfunction. You can have more non-disjunction and you can have problems with cell division. But then going even further, it may even also affect how that embryo, if it turned out okay, or if they're doing IVF and they have a euploid embryo, it can affect its ability to implant. But then the male, you mentioned the testes, so it's possible it can affect the quality of the sperm.
I think it could, because again, we're looking at a situation where you've got a duct, it's got epithelial lining, and that's where those SLC 26 cell transporters tend to be. And interestingly enough, when I went looking to find all the areas in the body where these kinds of cell transporters exist, I found them in the pancreas, I found them in the lungs. Susan Owens from the Triangle Oxalates group has talked a lot about the lungs as another location. They turn up in mucous membranes where you have those, you have them in the sinuses, you have them in the bladder, you have them in the gut, so there's all kinds of places where oxalate is known, but then there's a whole slew of other areas where we are aware of the presence of some of these cell transporters, but nobody's looking for oxalate being part of what's going on there.
No, they're definitely not. Although, like I said, there are some fertility clinics that do put their patients on carnivore or keto, but not necessarily because of the oxalates, because of the blood sugar. But I guess they're getting that benefit as well, because now by going on that, unless the keto is eating lots of nuts, that's the catch.
That's the catch. So you can do an implementation of keto. Like if you're really staying away from processed foods and you're eating a whole food keto, you might do okay with oxalate as long as you're not really focused on things like spinach and almonds and some of the really high oxalate components. But, it might actually be a drop in oxalate from what your diet was before. And of course, you're getting the metabolic support. Carnivore, really, you're nosediving the amount of oxalate you're taking in, even if you're still using spices and things like that. You're getting a fraction of the oxalate you got before. So I would not be surprised that that's part of the reason why those diets are helpful as well. Not just the metabolic aspect, but also you're lowering this toxin level.
Yeah, CNY is a clinic in New York. That's standard for them. The doctor's there, Dr. Clintz, I think his name is. He's a big carnivore. He's a big muscly guy too. And a lot of the women are complaining on the Facebook group about the diet he's making them do. I'm like, he's doing the right thing because of these people who are listening to him. They're actually conceiving. So